just go ahead. That is just, I said, we're about to start the recording, and we just communicated telepathically on that one. We are recording the meeting, so we will be able to make this link available to everyone who's not able to be here as well. Good to see Bennett joining us as well. Good morning and good day to you. And yeah, that would be great, Ashley. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, who's just going to welcome all of us. I'd first just like to say thank you to SMUD for hosting us. This is a really nice facility. We'll be having this and the next plenary here. Thank you very much, Alex and others, and for your IT support. Miles has been very helpful to us this morning. Jessica.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I feel like this is, one, it's good to be in the room with everyone and see you all. Good morning, Inga. And for those of you who are joining online, I'm not sure where to look. You guys can't really see us because we're off in the corner, but
you can be over there, and the camera is on the panel.
Here we go.
So just stand behind them.
Good morning, Ted. Hi, Barbara.
Hi. Good morning. That's your talk show host.
My talk show host, right. So we are here today. I feel like Oprah, we have this fabulous panel. No, we're really here today to do what the Water Forum does best, which is to have conversations about the really difficult, challenging, complex issues that play a big impact on the future of this region. So I'm absolutely thrilled that we are here. It has taken a lot of work to get to this place, so huge thanks to Tanya, to Sophie, wherever Sophie, right there, who knows all of your schedules for summer. There's a lot of work that's gone into prep for these sessions and the conversations today. I'm really looking forward to. And that's pretty much it. In terms of getting started, we're going to hear from our 1x4 members, and really the main point of today is to talk about conjunctive use and what that means for the region. I've got one thing at the end for disclosure, just to cover the Water Forum 2.0 budget, so don't let me forget that. And then in terms of other items, so there's agenda materials in the back. Those of you online, you received it via email. The agenda, we have this fabulous index of whiteboard actions, and then that really kind of summarizes all of the ideas that were presented or that were brainstormed at the April session. So there's 118 ideas. We printed them out for you. Our printer still works, which is amazing. We haven't used it in a few years. But anyways, we've printed out these for you. We will reference them today and throughout the working group sessions going forward, and also the next plenary as well. So with that, I think we've got a lot to talk about today. I don't think there's anything else for me to cover.
Yeah.
Are you good?
Thank you, Jessica.
All right.
Yeah. I think the only 1x4 member who's present is you, Clyde. And so I think we just wanted to take a moment to give you a chance to just talk about how the 1x4 has been really important in setting up this whiteboard exercise that we started on the 27th, and now with the continuation with this and the next plenary. So Clyde, why don't you come up here as well? And what I'm going to do, and I should have done this for Jessica, is just ask you to stand here in front of my computer, because then we'll see you on camera, Clyde. And just watch the cords maybe come around. Okay.
Is this a camera?
Yeah, it's a camera. So come on around here and sit, and go ahead and sit there, and then the camera will get you nicely. There you go.
First of all, just to introduce, I'm Clyde McDonald. I represent Save the American River Association, largely to organize to protect the American River Parkway and those things. The history of sort of the 1x4 kind of goes back a ways, but there's just a couple main points I'd like to make. There was a feeling by some that we really weren't making enough progress and we needed to make some changes. And so so there was a decision to make. We need to do some kind of a pivot the pivot was getting into the issues of how do we solve the dual objectives. That was, what is that? And then the kind of the mechanism to do that was, first of all, engage our members, ask them what they think, get their brains going about how these pieces could put together, and that's what you end up. That was the whiteboard session where people were allowed to just put up ideas on the board. I thought we would have 18 ideas. We had 118 ideas. There's a lot of duplication, but still, I think it accomplished that. And then the other element of it was to try to make sure that we did an education piece, and this is the first of that 2 plenary sessions of doing an education to make sure that our members understand what some of the major ideas are, and the ideas that would go into multiple work groups or would have issues in multiple work groups. Just to give you an example, I don't think that most of our members would understand how RiverArc works, who's involved, how big is it, where is it, all these things. I really don't think they really understand much of that. What is it that state is proposing? I don't think most people understand that. It's a complex ideas. So anyway, so the idea is to give everybody an education, and then we'll go into this. So that's what I would say, kind of the history coming forward and what the object is. Engage our members, make the pivot, do the education, move to work groups. That's sort of what it is. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Clyde, and for all of your work on the 1x4.
Sure.
All right. With that, I think if we really want to spend much of our time today on the conjunctive use panel, you might be wondering why there's just one panel today. And maybe I'll say one other thing about the 1x4. When we saw the 118 ideas and saw a lot of overlap of the ideas, we began to put them in thematic buckets. We felt that then it started to become clear that it would be actually really helpful for us to begin to knit these concepts together, and then we came to the panel approach. And so today, we grouped many of those ideas into this conjunctive use panel. And you can see, one of the things that we really wanted to do on these panels was to the degree that was possible, to have inter-caucus or cross-caucus representation. And so today you see environmental caucus and water caucus members and business caucus members in this panel. And in the July plenary, we had intended to have 3 more panels, but we found that we've been having to do some real contortionism around vacations. And so it looks like we'll have 2, and then we'll have to find another time for the demand management panel because we just don't have the availability of key panel members. So we'll address that, and we'll let you know when that occurs. I think that's sufficient for setting us up, and I'd like to pass it on to Jim Ray from the Business Caucus, who is the moderator for this panel.
Good morning, everybody. As Tanya said, I'm Jim Ray. I'm with the Business Caucus, and I represent the Building Industry Association of Superior, California. We've got 4 speakers, and Ted and Barbara are going to double team for the environmental perspective, and we changed the agenda up just a little bit from what you see printed. We're going to go a little out of order because Brett, maybe now that Brett's on Zoom, he's got more time, but anyway, we'll trade that up and let Barbara and Ted go toward the end, and then have Jim follow up. And we also decided just on Wednesday that rather than having a moderated discussion with the panel, that we'd leave more time for questions that come from the rest of the participants. So I'd appreciate it if you'd hold questions until we get through all the presentations, and then I think we'll have a good 25 or 30 minutes to have discussion and questions from all of you. So with that, what I wanted to start with is put a little context around the presentations that you're going to hear today and do a short review of the analysis that was done so we can understand better the issues and the magnitude of the challenges that are facing us in Water Forum 2.0 reaching an agreement. Actually, it's going to help. We have just a couple slides, but I'll start. The ad hoc team was formed last year, as you may remember, and the charge was to define and quantify the problems that are to be addressed. And we're going to summarize the results of that report that was published in February of this year. So first, 4 scenarios were analyzed. They're up here on this slide. The current situation of 2020, projected growth through what I call the urban water management demands, not necessarily going to occur in 2040, but that's just the label that it ended up, that we described it with. And with that future growth, we used the current hydrology so that we had a way to measure against other alternatives. And then the other 2 alternatives involve the same projected growth as well as a moderate climate change and a severe climate change, and included sea level rise of 55 centimeters, which I think is about 22 inches. So you go to the next.
Is it 55 inches, not centimeters?
No.
It's centimeters.
Centimeters.
Okay.
That's the first violation of the no question.
Strike one.
This next slide really highlights and summarizes all the results. So what were defined as critical drivers, we understood that climate change is going to produce warmer temperatures and cause the peak runoff to occur much earlier in the year, and resulting in a loss of snowpack and making it harder to capture runoff in Folsom Reservoir. And you can see that it moves from May, the peak runoff time from May to somewhere between January and March. Pretty significant change in the runoff pattern. And with Folsom being a relatively small reservoir, a real challenge in achieving its dual uses and be able to store that additional runoff that's coming earlier. The other driver, of course, was growth, and as well as climate change, both increased the demand for surface and groundwater. Then the consequences of this, the results of this, are summarized in the bottom part of this table. What's clear is Folsom Reservoir storage will be critically low, that's less than 120,000 acre feet, more often. And it shows in this slide that the magnitude of that under the 2 climate change alternatives would be from 17,000 acre feet less to 75,000 acre feet less. And that's really one of the gaps that we wanted to have defined in this analysis. Under the severe climate change, the hotter, drier scenario, it would increase the loss of storage 60 to over 100,000 acre feet. And the other critical point of the analysis here was that that critical low storage in Folsom would occur more often, once in 20 years under the moderate climate change, and once in 6 years in the hotter, drier, more severe climate change. Pretty substantial issue to deal with from a water supply standpoint, and the fisheries. The other thing that the analysis concluded was that using the end of May as a predictor of river temperatures later in the year, that storage in the critical month of the end of May could decrease 70,000 acre feet in moderate climate change and over 200,000 acre feet in severe. A big hole to fill in a critical year. Increased temperatures are projected in both climate change scenarios and are expected to be consistently well above suitable ranges. And salmonids would not be able to survive these temperatures that are predicted. So with those consequences in mind, we wanted to get a better understanding of one of the tools, conjunctive use, which could mitigate or partially mitigate these conditions. And I'd like to turn it over to Trevor Joseph, who's with the Regional Water Authority and a very knowledgeable expert in conjunctive use and the groundwater bank. So Trevor?
Yeah, Jim, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so today, if we can move to the next slide, I wanted to cover a couple of items. One, obviously conjunctive use, as Jim nicely laid out, but also a little bit on groundwater recharge, of course, what makes conjunctive use possible. I'm also going to touch on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and how that fits into conjunctive use operations and kind of what we're doing here in the greater Sacramento region. I'll then move to a little bit of background on climate adaptation, which really points to the need for the topic then that I'll talk more at length about, which is the water bank. Some preliminary planning we've done on the water bank and some existing conjunctive use in the region that really points to a lot of success and our ability to really develop the water bank. And then I'll go through where we're at on water bank development. We're kind of right in the middle of it. And we have a lot of work that we've started to complete, which I'll touch on, and a lot of work still in front of us. And I'll give you an overview there. So with that, let's move to the next slide, which is probably another build slide. Let's focus on the first topic here, groundwater and recharge methods. And so obviously you can see this depiction of the surface and groundwater system kind of depicts what we see in the Central Valley, obviously in the Sacramento region. And the point of this slide is just to kind of point to the complexity and the different methods for recharging our groundwater supply. So, groundwater exists beneath our feet, obviously. Groundwater exists between grains of sands and gravels and clay. There are no big caverns like the movies or big pockets of groundwater or lakes beneath our feet. It's simply the water that exists, again, between grains of sand, soil, that type of thing. I equate it always for layperson knowledge, kind of like you're digging at the beach and dry sand, and all of a sudden you hit wet sand. Well, essentially that's groundwater. It's just existing between the sand grains, and you've crossed over below the groundwater level close to the ocean. So with recharge, the groundwater is recharged by surface water. Really, there is no such thing as groundwater originating forming. All groundwater originated as surface water that found its way into the alluvial sediments there. Groundwater does not really exist in bedrock in any measurable or large amounts. In the Sierra foothills, Sierras, there is some groundwater, but it really exists between fractures of rock. It doesn't exist in large quantities like the Central Valley. So natural recharge happens through streams and creeks where it just percolates as it flows through our surface water channels. There's a lot of recharge at the mountain front. Again, kind of the contact between the bedrock and our alluvial sediments. So a lot of recharge occurs, especially on the eastern side of the Central Valley, right on that spot where you start to climb into the foothills. And then rain, direct percolation through rain. So there are ways to artificially recharge the basin, and that's what we're going to get into today. There's a couple of direct recharge methods. One is using percolation ponds, field flooding. That's actually a very cost-effective recharge method if you have the right soil conditions and have the space to do that type of recharge. There's injection wells, or what's also mentioned as aquifer storage and recovery, or referred to, I should say, as aquifer storage and recovery. You probably may have heard that term. City of Roseville has a very effective program, as does City of Woodland in our region, and they're taking excess surface water and actually reversing the flow in the well and injecting it into the groundwater basin and then recovering that later when they need it. And then finally, there's in lieu recharge. And this is the type of recharge that, in addition to Roseville's efforts, make up the most amount of recharge that we've seen in the Sacramento region. And essentially, this is utilizing and shifting the use to excess surface water when it's available in lieu of groundwater pumping. And what that results in is the groundwater table and the amount of groundwater that's stored beneath our feet increasing. Again, because we're not as reliant on groundwater as we've historically been during those periods, and can shift to surface water. So that's the groundwater 101. Let's go to the next slide. So conjunctive use is just that, as I mentioned, with in-lieu recharge and direct recharge. It's a water management strategy to really increase the total yield of water supply available. And how that's done is shifting from groundwater use to surface water use when there are wet or average years of surface water availability. So when there's, again, kind of excess surface water, when we have those wet years, instead of allowing that water to be lost, it's utilizing more surface water, shifting the use to more surface water than groundwater. And then conversely, in dry years, you're drawing from that groundwater that you've stored beneath our feet, and recovering essentially that stored volume, that banked water supply, allowing precious surface water to stay in the rivers and creeks when it's kind of needed most in those dry years. So that's conjunctive use as a water management strategy. Next slide. So in our region, the greater Sacramento region here, and you can see the map on the left, there's Sacramento County is kind of in the middle of that. It's not as well defined, although you can kind of see it. But groundwater people think of areas really in terms of groundwater basins. And so that's what's highlighted here is both the North American, and then I'll show you the South American subbasin. So those are groundwater basins as defined by the state of California, and really how groundwater managers look at managing groundwater supplies is in these areas, these geographic areas. On the right, what you'll see here is the hydrograph. So this shows groundwater levels over time. Groundwater levels are shown in feet mean sea level. And then the time period here is from approximately 1955 to about 2020. And you can see here that for a good 45-year, 50-year period, we've seen water levels decline significantly in the greater Sacramento area. And this is pointing specifically kind of in the heart of where we've seen the majority of groundwater level decline historically, kind of near the McClellan area of Sacramento County, Air Force Base in Sacramento County. What occurred here is the region came together and developed a major surface water conveyance pipeline that brought in surface water to areas historically reliant on groundwater. And that, amongst other conjunctive use management activities and projects, really not only stabilized groundwater levels, but you can see that they actually have started to increase slightly over that period from about 1995, 2000 to 2020. Now there's a cyclical nature of kind of highs, lows there. You see that pattern of up, down, and that's really just the cyclical nature of spring, fall measurements, when we see typically higher measurements of water levels in the spring versus the fall, and that's normal. But the trend is really promising, showing just how effective conjunctive water management, conjunctive use has been in this region. Next slide. And we're seeing, the same trend has occurred in portions of the South American subbasin. This time scale is a little different, but again, there were more historic low water levels before the early 2000s. The Freeport pipeline, brought in, or Freeport diversion, I should say, on conveyance facilities helped stabilize groundwater levels in the South American basin. So again, we've seen this both now in the North and South American subbasins, where conjunctive use has provided effective means to help stabilize and actually increase in areas groundwater levels. Next slide. So that's kind of our data, and I say our data, water managers in the greater Sacramento area. We also have Department of Water Resource data, and this is shown on the left and kind of zoomed in on the center. And this is Department of Water Resources kind of famous dot maps that they produce that give kind of a relative trend of groundwater levels over a period of time. And I do need to update this. I apologize. It's a little out of date, but the data is still relevant today. And it's showing here a 20-year period of groundwater levels, average groundwater levels between 1998 and 2018. And this is showing the feet per year of either groundwater level increase or decrease, or if there's no significant trend. And no significant trends in yellow. And you can see there's a lot of yellow kind of in the portions of the Central Valley here. It's not a complete picture, obviously, the entire Central Valley on the left. You see a lot of orange and red in the San Joaquin Valley. And obviously we've seen and heard and know all the challenges in the San Joaquin Valley in terms of groundwater level declines and the impacts in terms of land subsidence and domestic wells going dry in those regions. And this certainly shows that there certainly has been and continues to be in many areas groundwater level declines. But I wanted to highlight here the green dots kind of in the greater Sacramento area. Again, these two subbasins, we've actually seen in many portions of our subbasin, not all, but we've seen actually increases in water levels. Again, correlates and that data you just saw on the hydrographs in the prior two slides. So again, that's promising, showing the conjunctive use over that 20-year period has been effective. On the right, this is a map, kind of a poor one. I need to find a better map, but it's a contour map. So it shows the depth to groundwater and also can give you an idea of where, in which direction groundwater flows in. Now this is focused more on the Sacramento County boundaries here. And you can see these kind of bullets of circles, and they depict essentially lower elevations of groundwater. And so we have these groundwater depressions that still exist. And again, if you, those two hydrographs you saw previously, you saw where we created, the region has created groundwater level depressions, cones of depression in the basin, but yet water levels are now stabilized or slightly increasing in many areas. Well, these cones of depression actually create a opportunity. They create essentially storage space. This is area where we can increase the volume of groundwater banked or stored. And so we have this capacity. It's been estimated that we have about 1.8 million acre feet of available storage because of these residual declines that have created this area of storage capacity. And so the point here is that that's a significant storage space that equates to almost 2 Folsom reservoirs if they were full, or the capacity of 2 Folsom reservoirs. So a lot of vacated space that we have the ability to store water in our region. Next slide. So let me get into a little bit more of what this region has done. A lot of the water agencies just in the Sacramento Groundwater Authority area of the North American subbasin. So just essentially in the Sac County portion of that North American subbasin, about 10, 12 years ago, got together and worked on developing an accounting framework for conjunctive use and identified some target pumping volumes to encourage conjunctive use kind of on their own accord. And they actually were focused just in the central area of the SGA area. So even a smaller subset of the total SGA area was the focus of this accounting framework. And so since that time, the agencies have annually kept track of how much water has been banked through conjunctive use just in that central portion of the SG area. Accounting is incredibly important, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But this accounting process really has illustrated the effectiveness in terms of the quantity of water that has been banked through conjunctive use. And so this just shows the net amount of water banked in green, the target pumping, which was almost never exceeded by all the agencies that participated in this, and that there's a lot of water. Some estimates here using this accounting process of more than 300,000 acre feet, closer to now 400,000 acre feet over this period has been banked. And again, that's very consistent with those water level increases that we've seen. That's been very effective. Now, this is specific process that is updated by the organization that I work for, the Sacramento Groundwater Authority, and the agencies are looking at the best use of accounting for the bank in the future. And I'll touch on that because that's going to be potentially a different process, maybe utilizing some of the same principles, but that will be done with the actual Sacramento Regional Water Bank. But again, this is a preview of how accounting can be done effectively. Next slide. So let me touch on Sigma. For those of you that know me, I almost can't get through a presentation without Sigma because I used to work at DWR in the Sigma group and help write the regulations. So I apologize. But there is some relevance to Sigma here, and I think it's important just to mention a couple of things. So Sigma passed in late 2014, became effective January 1st, 2015, requires that high and medium priority basins adhere to law and regulations as it relates to defining sustainability and managing groundwater to sustainable yield over a 20-year period. And really it's defined at kind of its core elements in terms of sustainability with the avoidance of what are called undesirable results. And those little icons on the bottom are the six, what have been defined, or referred to as the 6 deadly sins of Sigma: chronic lowering of groundwater levels, seawater intrusion, reduction of storage, degraded water quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. Now, we don't have seawater intrusion. That's not a possibility in our basin. So we're left with 5 deadly sins of Sigma. So the relevance here to conjunctive use and banking is conjunctive use, water banking, the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, all needs to be done consistent with our groundwater sustainability plan that we developed through Sigma. We have to make sure any conjunctive use operations, any really groundwater use and management needs to be consistent with those goals. We cannot have undesirable results. We cannot have chronic groundwater levels, degraded water quality, reduction of storage, and land subsidence, so on and so forth. And so this is in place now. I look at Sigma really because it identified conjunctive use as one of the methods to obtain sustainability when the act was passed. And our Sacramento Regional Water Bank that I'll describe here in a minute, and our conjunctive use activities are actually identified in our local groundwater sustainability plans as one of the projects and management actions to maintain sustainability in our basin. So it really, Sigma works really in concert with what we're trying to do here and accomplishing with conjunctive water management. Next slide. And maybe I jumped ahead. So Sigma requires that agencies develop groundwater sustainability plans and implement those plans that, again, avoid those undesirable results, but also identify projects and management actions to avoid those undesirable results. And we are doing that both in the North and South American basin. And again, conjunctive water management projects such as the Sacramento Regional Water Bank are part of the solution to maintain sustainability. Next slide. Final slide on Sigma and why it's so important is there's multiple beneficial uses and users of groundwater in our basins. There's agricultural, there's municipal, domestic users, there's the environment, groundwater dependent ecosystems, and then there are downstream users of surface water. And so when you pump groundwater that's interconnected with surface water, you are taking surface water out of the streams and creeks, and whether that's a significant volume or not is really dependent upon how much you pump. and those beneficial users downstream. And so our groundwater sustainability plans that we created here locally look at all of these beneficial uses and users, defines sustainable conditions, considering all these users. And again, with conjunctive use, actually will create conditions that improve these users' ability to utilize groundwater. Next slide. All right, so let's get into what's the need? What kind of drove the water bank development? And a couple of background pieces of information here, and this is from Public Policy Institute. This is the depiction of just the changing hydrology and kind of how water moves through the delta depending upon wet and dry years. So obviously on the left, you see a depiction of wet year, 2017 hydrology really created conditions. And again, the bar charts on the right show that there are, estimated volumes of surface water sources that move through the delta between 60 and 70 million acre feet. And the uses, water uses, are depicted in the kind of that middle category there, middle bar, showing upstream uses, in delta uses, and exports, I should say, during 2017. And that was quite significantly less than the delta outflow that year. And so you can see the delta outflow, both in terms of system outflow, ecosystem outflow, and then uncaptured outflow. And it's that orange bar that's really promising for water managers and folks like myself of utilizing that potentially a very small volume of that uncaptured outflow, not letting that excess water be lost out the Golden Gate, and utilizing that outflow for conjunctive use or groundwater banking. Again, putting that water into our groundwater basin so that it can be utilized later. But in 2021, the conditions were very, very different, dry years, and there's not that outflow available for conjunctive use. And again, with conjunctive use, then you're looking to utilize the groundwater system more and actually trying to increase or not decrease the amount of surface water that flows through the system during those years. So again, this just kind of shows on a more larger scale how conjunctive use works and what kind of water is potentially available in our system. Next slide. Changing hydrology maybe should have been the title of this slide. So on the right, our region is really kind of managing we call it almost three reservoirs. We're managing three sources or reservoirs of water supply. There's the snowpack, there's our surface water reservoir, which is pointing to Folsom Lake, and you can kind of barely see it. You can see how small our surface water reservoir is in our region, in our watershed, and then the groundwater basin. So, groundwater storage is one of the best options to adapting to climate change and really capturing that snowpack that is, frankly, with the size of our reservoir, isn't large enough to really adequately capture a significant volume of that surface water. We can utilize the groundwater basin to do that. And we're going to see with climate change, actually, you can see the historic average in terms of Folsom Lake storage levels, that it's anticipated that the levels, as Jim referenced, may be more threatened in future years, will be more threatened, but also those levels will be different depending on the months and years, the months. And so trying to capture that water during those times it's available is very important. Next slide. So couple of slides here on the American River Basin study. This is a study completed a couple of years ago, looking at the potential effects of climate change on the American River Basin, and identified a series of vulnerabilities. They include and identified, Folsom's relatively small size, the competing priorities of Folsom Reservoir, forest fires that unfortunately we've seen a lot of in recent years, shrinking snowpack, over-reliance on the American River, risk to groundwater overdraft, and of course, sensitive endangered species potential losses. So among high urban flood risks as well. So these vulnerabilities were identified in that study. Next slide. But the study also identified a series of adaptation measures or next steps. And again, I just wanted to highlight the federally recognized groundwater bank or Sacramento Regional Water Bank as one of those adaptation strategies to help mitigate the effects of climate change. Next slide. All right, so preliminary planning. Let me talk a little bit more about the water bank, but the precursor really to us in the region starting the water bank is the effective conjunctive use that's occurred. But what is the water bank? The water bank essentially is a recharge and water storage of excess surface water underground by specific parties, and requires a formal accounting system. I showed you kind of a prior accounting system for conjunctive use to track balances. And the balances are drawn down during dry times as members withdraw water and increase during wet times as water is deposited. So again, it's a conjunctive use. I kind of keep talking about that shift. The contributing water bank partners. So there's, I think, 26 agencies here that have invested their time and finance money into helping develop the water bank. Next slide. Conjunctive use and water banking benefits. So let me talk a little bit about the benefits. Again, this is our existing conjunctive use program. You could actually cycle through all this. I apologize. I shouldn't have had this all on animation. So, and if you go back one, yeah, thank you. So the benefits of our existing conjunctive use, again, all that conjunctive use that you saw previously that the region's done, it's mainly drought resiliency. It's providing that water supply reliability. There are also opportunities for groundwater substitution transfers. In this region, periodically, agencies have participated in the groundwater substitution transfer process, which through the state of California and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation enables agencies to provide some water outside of the region through conjunctive use. The revenue that's received through that helps these agencies kind of offset costs to further enhance their groundwater infrastructure. But with water banking, with the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, we really have an opportunity to enhance conjunctive use much more significantly and develop a lot more benefits. Still, that drought resiliency is there, the regional water supply resiliency, but we have an opportunity to improve Central Valley Project operational flexibility, opportunities for ecosystem benefits, and again, that opportunity to contribute to statewide water reliability is there, either through banking transfers or the groundwater substitution transfer program. And again, funds and investments from banking help support additional conjunctive use and or other important water supply or activities of these agencies. So water banking is really going to help this region significantly. Next slide. So again, a little bit of background on kind of some preliminary work that was done to look at the potential of water banking. This was the Regional Water Supply Reliability Plan, I believe in 2019. This data comes from that plan, where the utilizing existing infrastructure among water agencies, many of the water agencies you saw on the prior slide there, that based on actual data of surface versus groundwater use. So on the far left, you see under wet conditions. So we've identified 3 wet years, 2011 through 2013, and identified that the region, the agencies involved in the study, that 69% of the supply was met through surface water of these agencies during that period, and groundwater 31%. And again, with conjunctive use, we're trying to incentivize and increase the amount of surface water when there's excess surface water in wet conditions. And with existing infrastructure, reoperating how the agencies utilize and meet water demands through more surface water, we've estimated that 86% of the demands could be met with surface water, reducing the amount of groundwater use during those wet years to 14%. So again, that's that shifting, that's that conjunctive use. That's a big shift of the amount of surface water that could be taken. And of course, what that does is either through direct recharge with wells or with in-lieu recharge, banks groundwater beneath our feet. In dry conditions, it's the opposite. So the dry year we utilized in this study was 2015. Actual surface water use during that year of these agencies was 64%. Groundwater was 36%. Again, not too different than the wet actual conditions, as you can see. We need to shift that and utilize much more groundwater and reduce the amount of surface water during those year types, dry years, excuse me. And the potential, again, with existing infrastructure, is potentially getting up to 58% of groundwater use, drawing from that stored or banked water beneath our feet during those critical years, those critically dry years, and reducing surface water use to 42%. Next slide. So what that does, what that essentially means in terms of a quantity, is there's the potential, again, with existing infrastructure, of recharging or banking 63,000 and change acre feet in wet years, and then recovering about 58,000 acre feet in dry years with the near-term new facilities. And what's meant by that is an analysis was done just looking at the agency's existing capital improvement projects that they've identified in their plans to meet water management strategies and requirements in the future. So existing facility or near-term facilities, things that are very feasible, those numbers could increase with a significant investment to essentially 90,000 acre feet of recharge and 95,000 acre feet of recovery potential. At that time, the infrastructure costs were estimated at $300 million. It might be double that now. This was done before COVID and before inflation. We kind of need to update those numbers to get a better sense of what the cost would be in the future to expand the water bank. So next slide, please. This is kind of a more complicated slide or graphic. And again, this is based on preliminary estimates, the information that I just presented. And I'll kind of run through this quickly because I know I'm taking some time here. But this is just showing over a 86-year period of known hydrology, what kind of recharge and recovery scenarios could be run that maintains, again, or increases the amount of water banked in our groundwater basins. And so the above the zero line are those years when recharge is occurring, and below the zero line are years when recovery is occurring, again, more dry years. And this analysis shows that hundreds of thousands of acre feet could be banked in our groundwater basins. Next slide. Right now, we're focused on utilizing municipal sources of supply, excess supply, but we can always look at expanding the water bank through the use of recycled water or even in more agricultural areas. And so this map on the right just shows the agencies that the existing study has focused largely on those urban areas and the amount of conjunctive use that they can accomplish. But there is potential for more. Next slide. And I think I'm gonna have to speed it up a little bit. I apologize, I'm taking more time than I thought I would. The goal of the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, or one of the goals, is to become federally recognized. This provides a lot of additional flexibility to store Central Valley Project water in the groundwater basins here. I just wanted to point that all the other federally recognized water banks in California are actually in the lower San Joaquin Valley. This is going to be the first federally recognized bank in the upper Central Valley. Next slide. There are challenges. We need to look at ways to incentivize conjunctive use. For many agencies, pumping groundwater is much cheaper than taking surface water, even when it's available. There are other challenges to make sure that we're looking at treatment and different water quality between agencies. So it's not as if this is a necessarily easy process. We do need to work through those challenges and make sure that we can incentivize agencies' ability to shift in advance conjunctive use in bank water. Next slide. All right, I'm going to just touch real fast on where we're at in terms of the water bank development. So again, with this graphic, we really kind of broke down the development of the water bank into 3 stages. We've done a lot of work. Again, we're pretty bullish on our ability to complete this project just because we know what it takes to do conjunctive use. We have a track record of success, and that's kind of shown there on the far left. We've had a lot of public meetings, stakeholder forums. We have many more plans. Our next one is tentatively targeted for October of this year. And we're doing all these activities. There's a lot of activities, though, to develop the bank. Ultimately, we need a environmental document and a CEQA and NEPA document. But there's other elements of advancing this project. We are improving technical tools. What that means is essentially we are about to embark on our surface and groundwater modeling so that we can put those scenarios of put-take cycles, recharge and recovery to make sure that we're not seeing any impacts on the surface water features. Also to make sure that we're not seeing any impacts from a sigma perspective, groundwater dependent ecosystems, the beneficial uses and users of water. We're also looking at governance and institutional requirements to operate the bank in the future. So there's a lot of elements here. Next slide. And they're kind of shown here. This is kind of just a summary of where we're at. There's many planning components. We've first just wanted to document our goals, objectives, principles, and constraints with water banking to make sure we're very transparent in terms of how we plan to approach conjunctive use in this project. We're working on roles and responsibilities, org structure, about to get into what's needed for an accounting system on the bank. We're starting water modeling, as I mentioned, and again, ultimately, we're going to get to environmental documentation and other requirements. Next slide. Communication engagement is a huge part of this project. Here is, and I don't expect anybody to be able to read all this, but I mentioned the public meetings. We have a lot of meetings with individual interests and stakeholders, but we also post answers to questions that we receive on the bank. Almost weekly. I think we're now every other week or on that frequency. That's all available on our website. If you're really interested in getting more information on the bank, it is there. Next slide. I mentioned the goals, objectives, principles, constraints. Again, this document's on our website, lays out how the agencies are approaching this project and provides some clear transparency, in my opinion, on just, again, the focus of the bank. So please take a look at that information too when you have time. Governance. There's kind of a lot to governance. And again, I kind of bundled accounting, some other elements here. We need to work closely also on the relationship and ongoing communication engagement with groundwater sustainability agencies under SGMA to make sure banking operations are consistent with groundwater sustainability plans. And so governance is one of those items where, again, there's kind of just a lot of elements here, and how we look at the baseline in terms of what's been done historically, how we look at potentially leaving a certain volume of banked water, recharged water in the basin as a leave behind. A lot of banks leave a certain volume behind to make sure that sustainability is always reached. So these topics are being discussed right now with the program committee, which is made up of those agencies interested in advancing the bank. And we're working through the governance items now. Next slide. Accounting. I don't have time to really give this justice because I think I'm running out of time, but accounting is a huge part of the banking. I mentioned a prior accounting system that you saw. Really, we have different accounting accounts, if you will, under the Sacramento Regional Water Bank, or WIL. We have the Central Valley Project account. We're calling this the American Basin account at this point. So it's utilizing federal water and how we account for federal water in our bank. There's what we're calling the Sierra Nevada at this point. Names may change here. We're trying to find some creative names, but this is accounting of non-CVP supplies, so agencies' existing water rights or other supplies. Harvest Water is a major project in the South American subbasin that really utilizes recycled water through conjunctive use. That it will be an account of its own because it's such a unique and large project. And then if we have additional agricultural flood mar type of supplies, there's potentially even future accounts. So accounting is incredibly important to make sure that we can clearly and transparently show how much water is banked beneath our feet. It's going to be an incredible important component of our banking project. Next slide. I'm not going to get into this for the sake of time. Again, this just kind of shows the recharge and recovery utilizing just the American River or American Basin and Sierra Nevada account systems and how that works. But let's move on. Finally, surface and groundwater modeling process. So surface and groundwater modeling, again, is a tool. Both those models, both CalSim, which is really focused more on surface water, and our COSANA groundwater model are tools that we can really utilize and forecast how the bank may affect or will affect the surface water features as well as the groundwater basin in terms of water levels. And there's a multi-step process here because we're really working to make sure that we're utilizing kind of the best data and the strengths of each model and sharing data amongst those two platforms so that we can have the most kind of robust in confidence with our modeling analysis. So again, we're just kicking off that modeling work. In future meetings, we'll be able to really explain how the bank's going to work as it relates to surface and groundwater systems. Again, we are committed to making sure that the bank does not create any impacts to these systems. That's one of our objectives in our principles and constraints document. So look forward to that in the future. I know this will be of a lot of interest maybe to many in terms of our data and analysis. Next slide. I think that's it. So that was a quick overview, and I'll stop there and turn it back over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Hi, Sophie. I think I might be the next speaker. You're going to bring up the next presentation.
We were muted.
They were muted, Jim.
People online couldn't hear you.
They couldn't hear you.
Okay. So we're gonna hear from Brett Ewart as our next speaker about implementing tools to access surface water, groundwater, and the challenges and opportunities they present. So turn it over to you, Brett.
And
Yeah,
just
thanks,
to
Jim.
say, we need
Apologies.
Jim,
for
We're
the
running about 10 minutes behind, so.
10 minutes behind. All
yeah,
right.
1 second.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Can you hear me? Oh, we're running a little bit behind, just to let you know, if we could try to stay on time with your presentation. And we do need to mute the room while you present because the mics are very sensitive, and I know that some of you online were getting background noise. So we'll need to pause in between each of them so we can unmute the room.
That's fine, Tanya. I'll keep an eye on the clock. And apologies for not being there, everybody. I've got quite a cold here, and if I have to go on mute myself to cough a little bit, just my apologies. So for my role today on the presentation, I wanted to sort of ground some of the concepts that Trevor was mentioning in some actual infrastructure projects. Like, how as a region have we managed to either, sustain or in many cases increase groundwater levels in the north and the south basin. So what you see on the map here, it's we've got this big infrastructure map. Obviously, you can't read it here. Although I think in a couple of slides, I'll drill into some detailed, pipelines and connections. The dots you see on there are the sort of major intake structures in the region. I'm not going to focus on all of these today. In some cases, they don't necessarily have as much of a role in conjunctive use, or maybe I wasn't able to coordinate with with that agency for better. So go ahead and advance to the next slide. Thank you. So I thought I'd just start upstream near Folsom. What you're seeing here is we commonly would call the Folsom diverters, principally Roseville, San Juan, and Folsom, relying on a concentrated sort of intake approach. I'll go into a little bit more detail with Roseville in a bit, but there's San Juan retail relies exclusively on surface water, as does Folsom. But the San Juan facility certainly has other capacity, and which I'll go into a little more detail here. And you see, I mentioned that they have the ability to move water to other agencies like Citrus Heights or Fair Oaks or Sac-Suburban, Cal-Am, and I think maybe, and Tim's in the room, there's a connection to Tim's agency, Rio Linda, and if not, then it's readily accessible. And what you see here is San Juan's intake, just behind it. That's looking like a brimming full Folsom. Go ahead to the next slide. Next slide, Sophie.
Next slide.
Thank you. So from that facility, and apologies, Paul, if I get anything wrong here, that's about 150 MGD facility. And what it connects to, and Trevor mentioned earlier in his presentation, some significant pipelines. You see another one of those contour maps here. I'm not sure the date of this contour map, but in purple, you see what we call the cooperative transmission main, which connects to the Antelope transmission pipeline. And from here, yeah, thank you, Tanya. If you can mute the room, I'm getting a lot of feedback. From that San Juan facility, right, significant volumes of water. I think it might be rated up to about 90 million gallons a day, the pipeline capacity, can move water to groundwater agencies like Fair Oaks or Citrus Heights, Sac-Suburban Water District, again, Cal-Am. I actually reflected on one period of time. I think when San Juan was testing their facilities, they needed to move a lot of water just to test it. And surface water from the San Juan facilities made its way all the way down into the city of Sacramento. So significant connectivity between Sac-Suburban and various other agencies. Next slide, please. Just wanted to point out I think maybe our formatting got a little skewed here. It might have gotten pulled into a wide screen. So apologies for the formatting issues. I just wanted to point out, the Roseville ASMR projects. Trevor already mentioned it. I think I want to draw your attention to the graphic there. It's a little small probably for you, but during injection periods, you'll see sort of that mounding effect under the injection where the groundwater levels are rising. And of course, during an extraction period, you see it drop down. One of the reasons I wanted to point that out is that, agencies in the lower parts of the valley, like the city of Sacramento, we've investigated that too. But in some cases, it's, ASR can be problematic if you've got shallow groundwater levels. If you live anywhere in the pocket area in Sacramento, if you're not careful, you can float a swimming pool if you're in your yard. So ASR is a great tool, but not appropriate in every location. And I just can't help but point to a couple headlines here. Roseville has been really successful, and has caught the attention of the local press. Particularly in this wet year, they've managed to store, quite a bit of water in the aquifer. Next slide. Thank you. Moving on to Carmichael Water District. They're pulling water from the lower part of the American River after Lake Natoma or the Nimbus facility. You see this is their membrane filtration facility. And in the hydrograph there, what you're seeing is, generally a predominant reliance on surface water. But the groundwater component, which is in the blue, during the periods of like 2014, 2015, during a drought, you're seeing a shift towards groundwater. In 2020, you'll see a minor bump there. They're also shifting to extra groundwater capacity to facilitate also one of the groundwater substitution transfers that Trevor had mentioned. Next slide, please. Calling your attention to the city of Sacramento, my agency, which I'm the most familiar with, of course. We have two intake facilities, one on the American River near the State College, the second right at the confluence near Discovery Park and north of the rail yards. What you can kind of see on the right, the green squares, that gives you a sense of where they're at. The combined capacity of those facilities it really kind of depends on the time of year, but well in excess of 200 million gallons a day of treatment capacity. Next slide. So what you see here is just an exhibit out of our urban water management plan. And the reason I wanted to point this out to you is there's a sort of a green polygon that stretches beyond the city limits. And this is what we call our American River place of use. And so thank you. Just hold there. From those two facilities, either the Sac River Water Treatment Plant or the Fairbairn facility, we can move water, and go ahead and just advance it one. No, go back one. Sorry, I thought I had some animation in there. Yeah, so you can see we have the ability to send water to Sac Suburban. We have the ability to send water to Cal-Am, Sac County Water Agency. But not everyone in the American River place of use receives water from the city of Sacramento. Some are still relying exclusively on groundwater. But that's what we're here to talk about today is finding a way to sort of expand the capabilities. Go ahead and advance. Just sort of zooming in here, this is that infrastructure map that we started the presentation with. You see the Fairbairn facility just to the south there. And in the early 2000s, after the signing of the first water forum agreement, the city constructed a 54-inch diameter pipeline under the river. That was one of my first projects, actually, as an assistant engineer with the city. It wrapped around and moved up to Sac Suburban. All those little white sort of dots you see there represent various connections with other agencies. And so from there, we actually serve water to Sac Suburban Water District from that 54-inch. It goes straight into one of their facilities you see to the left. Go ahead and advance one. Yeah, you can go back. I think we're missing something here. So what you see on the left-hand side is their pump station at the Enterprise Northrop facility. And the main reason I wanted to kind of point to this is one of the difficulties in moving water between one agency or the other is, Sac Suburban frankly runs at a higher water pressure than the city does. So just to take the water, they needed to construct an expensive and robust facility. It's a 5 million gallon steel storage tank. And what you're seeing there is a whole line of booster pumps that enable them to take that water and bring it up to their service pressure so that their customers don't see a drop, right, when they open the valve and take water from the city of Sacramento. Go to the next, please. Moving around the corner, I don't think I'd be going too far to characterize this as one of the flagship projects for Sacramento County Water Agency. This is, if you're familiar with the Pocket area, this is their intake up in the upper left, the Freeport intake. And then you see, their main treatment plant, the Vineyard Water Treatment Plant, which is, I think maybe rated at approximately 50 MGD, but scalable in the future. Down on the bottom there, I just sort of hatched out the alignment, right? It seems a little strange to see a facility in the middle of the county and wondering how it gets from the Sacramento River. So it's a long pipeline, and I think many of the people in the room have actually even worked on this project at various times. I'll go ahead to the next. And so if you're kind of wondering, on those hydrographs that Trevor was showing, how are we raising those levels? Here's an example, right? You see groundwater being almost exclusively used in the early, mid 2000s, 2010, and you see a progressive drop in the groundwater that the county, Sacramento County Water Agency, has been using, and then a commensurate increase in surface water along the way. Now I don't have 2021 on here or 22. I think you probably see a shift back to groundwater and a reduction of surface water given the drought we just went through. But overall, over the last many years, significant volumes of surface water have been used in lieu of groundwater. And so you've been, of course, seeing those groundwater level trends increase. Next slide, please. And yeah, I think that's a copy of the one Trevor previously had, so we can move to the next. So Trevor already hit on some of the challenges. You see right here on the right-hand side, this is an exhibit from the Regional Reliability Plan. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I'll just say, I've been working on these sort of programs for some time, and we're making progress, but it is slow. Some of it is real in terms of and concrete. The pricing differentials that Trevor mentioned, it's a real thing. In the end, right, if you're making bad business decisions, ultimately that materializes as increased rates for customers. So, we're very careful about that. Things like fluoridation practices really rise to the surface. You wouldn't think it, but they really rise to the surface. Just the sort of cultural mindset of treatment plant operators or water system operators. They're very conservative, and they should be. This is drinking water. And so, what treatment plant and distribution operators like is nice, steady operation of facilities. They don't like sudden changes, right? They don't like revving the engine and then backing off. They want a slow, systematic approach to, chemical feed systems and pumps, just making sure the water is available. So shifting to a more dynamic operation, it takes time to sort of slowly move in that direction and provide them the tools to do it as well. My last bullet point on here, I just wanted to point out an observation I've made is that sometimes when we talk about, water banking, folks think, wow, this is just a big extraction program. And that's true during the drier years, but to maintain good basin sustainability, it really requires an equal level of commitment to the wet years of backing off of that groundwater use and relying on surface water in periods like this. Next slide. So I want to move on to some projects that are coming up, I think, in the short term. What you see here is just a sort of a dot map showing the location of a series of what I'm calling high priority groundwater projects. Many of these I expect to be finished within the next couple of years. The totality of these projects is lining up to provide a conjunctive use, an expansion of conjunctive use to the tune of maybe 30,000 acre feet. Next slide, please. I'd be remiss in not mentioning harvest water. Ted, I think you asked me to include a piece on this. This is the sort of southern portion of the South American subbasin. And under this program, you see in the exhibit on your right, this is a large pipeline from the regional sanitation plant moving down into the sort of core of an agricultural area, providing upwards of 50,000 acre feet in lieu of groundwater use that's currently occurring. Next slide. I want to spend a few minutes on RiverArc. I've got several slides here, and I think Clyde had some interest in this as well. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. So what you see on this map, you see those same intakes that I put on the very first map we have here. And this isn't really a groundwater exhibit per se, but it's really showing the reliance, the overall orange there is the heavy reliance on the American River. Agencies like the city of Sacramento and its wholesale customers, it's a blend of Sacramento River water and American River water. And then of course, there's the Sac County Water Agency exclusively relying on surface water from the Sacramento River. The big takeaway here is that Folsom is small and over-relied upon. Next slide. Just giving you a sense here of the overall runoff, no surprise. The runoff you expect through the Sacramento River, the main stem, is significantly higher than the American River. Next slide, please. So RiverArc, in a nutshell, it's making use of an existing intake, owned and operated by Natomas Mutual Water District. You see it, it's a small picture there, but you see it called out. That raw water pipeline would move through the north part of the county to a common treatment plant. And then you'd see a series of finished water transmission mains moving to agencies like the city of Sacramento or to perhaps Rio Linda. But I'll also point out the connection to the cooperative transmission main, which is the first project that we pointed out. And that would be the dash line connecting to Folsom Lake there. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of that existing intake. It's already screened for anadromous fish, so it's ready to produce water. Next slide. Big takeaways from RiverArc and some calcium modeling we've done. What we're thinking is that upwards of 50,000 acre feet, we're going to shift from direct diversions from Folsom over to the Sacramento River. What's the benefit here? Well, it's water that stays in Folsom and eventually moving through the lower American River for aquatic resources. The benefit there is you're still not going to have any changes to net delta outflow, but it's providing a benefit to cold water management in Folsom and lower American River. Next slide. We also believe that it can support a good conjunctive use program. I won't go into every row here, but there are a series of areas that are, relying on groundwater or will be relying on groundwater. And with the connections to the RiverArc facility, we think that we can provide a conjunctive use program on the order of, say, 30 to a little over 50,000 acre feet of in lieu use of surface water rather than the groundwater. Next slide, please. I think this is my final slide, but for just to kind of tie it back to the water forum here is, you've got agencies like the city of Sacramento, Placer County Water Agency, CalAm, Sacramento County, presently participating in RiverArc. There may be others who are interested in the future, but we really believe that it can bring multiple benefits. It supports conjunctive use, and then it also supports better cold water management in the lower American River. And I'll pause there. I went through kind of quick, but I was being mindful of time. So that's my last slide. Tanya, you can take it from here, or Jim.
Okay, well, thank you, Brett. That was good, and you got us pretty close to back on time. So now we'll turn to representatives of the environmental community, Barbara Uvoy and Ted Rao. for a perspective on conjunctive use. So turn it over to you, Barbara.
Okay, great. We're going to shock your eyeballs. There won't be a single picture, graph, or map because our tremendous graphics team seems to be missing. So you'll see this is pretty basic typing. So you've heard some good discussions. Thank you, Brett and Trevor, for setting up the stage. You've heard about some of the technical challenges, some of the potential quantities that could be realized through conjunctive use. The Environmental Caucus believes it's a very important tool, but as always, the devil's in the details. So we'd like to talk about some of the concerns and the challenges that we feel we need to work through in the work groups as we start to move the water forum process forward. And so we want to make sure that we've raised some of these more global concepts to you early on, and we've lumped our concerns into three main areas. And so we can go to the next slide. It's not me. I know what I'm doing. Thank you, Sophie.
I'll just hold it up.
Okay, so the first concept we want to introduce is basically a do no harm and in fact improve concept. So you've heard it, Trevor mentioned several times. We think there are ways to support healthy environmental flows. There are ways that we can make sure we are not impacting existing wells, whether they be domestic, ag, or small production, especially the groundwater-dependent ecosystems. We want to make sure that we're not harming them, and in fact, we're improving them. And we want to look at making sure we can increase groundwater levels and thus create no groundwater level changes that will make it harder for the GSAs in the region to manage. Because every time we cut down that margin, it reduces the ability of others to work with it. So the next slide, so more specifically, again, surface water diversions that do not harm fisheries, recreation, or other resource-based uses. And here we want to make sure that we achieve all those types of benefits that were alluded to before in a very positive way. I don't think we saw a lot of wet, dry year scenarios. I think that the two ends of the spectrum are pretty easy to envision, that when there's a lot of water, you can take, more water, and when there's less water, you use more groundwater. But it's those shoulder years where I think we need a lot of discussion on when is the right amount of flow in the river to maintain healthy environmental systems without harming them in any way, and in fact, improving them. So those are the areas that will be the focus of the conversation for those particular years. We also want to make sure that groundwater storage is increased so that GDEs, the groundwater-dependent ecosystems, improve, and that river temperatures are in fact lowered by improved surface-groundwater interaction. So depending on how, where, and when you do conjunctive use, you can make some positive changes, not impact them, but you can make positive changes. And that's what we'd like to see. Next slide, please. We'd like to make sure that nature-based recharge solutions are strongly considered for recharge whenever practical. You saw some pictures of where those areas are with a lot of permeability. This also requires, of course, close use of the planning resources we have to maintain those areas as open areas for recharge, not housing developments when we might be limiting our future options if we pave over too quickly. Next is the conjunctive use projects. We'd like to make sure that they maximize the use of recycled water and excess 215 excess stormwater, which I think most people would agree are those kind of things, for recharge in all three subbasins. You saw the North Basin and the South Basin. We also want to make sure the consumeness is considered. When you look at how water moves in the groundwater systems, the consumeness leaks into the other basins. Water moves through those. It's not a single, those definitions of the boundary lines are not hard and solid things. These are leaky systems. That's why they're subbasins, not individual basins. We want to make sure that conjunctive use projects don't inadvertently impact other environmental resources in other locations. Okay, the next concept, we'd like to see if we can work on a transparent, federally recognized regional groundwater bank that will serve the entire region. As Trevor noted, the planning so far for the governance of the federally acknowledged water bank has been done primarily in the North Basin, although some of the North Basin participants also serve in some of the South Basin GSAs. But primarily it's been mainly focused on the North Basin with the Harvest Water Project in the South. But our region is an entire region and we're connected in many ways. So we want to make sure we're looking at the entire region as we move through. So next, here we go, more specifically. We want to make sure that we achieve the Water Forum 2.0 goals and the SGMA requirements as we move through with the Water Forum planning. So we want to make sure all the entities are involved, that there are in the conjunctive use planning, that there are broad areas of participation. Usually it is the participants who are contributing financially, which makes sense, but often that is one group and doesn't include some of the other stakeholders in the area that have an important say on how the regional groundwater resource gets used. And so we want to make sure that those individuals and those entities are recognized as well in the governance structure. We want to make sure that the water banks or the conjunctive use projects are operated to make use of the subbasins for environmental water storage and to increase regional groundwater storage. The concept of having a set aside or a leave aside or a leave in for groundwater use is an important one to consider. There may be a lot more flexibility in how we use the water for environmental purposes in those years where we really need some additional help. So we want to make sure that we look at that concept, that it's not just an in and out kind of concept. Again, operation and governance structure that includes provisions to do no environmental harm, and particularly to maintain strict accounting of all the deposits, withdrawals, and transfers, and provide the environmental benefits. The accounting is going to be important to a lot of people, and transparency of the water bank. Because it's, you can't see it, you can't measure it, with a yardstick. And so, there's questions of the leakiness of the basin, there's questions of, people that are not being measured and monitored, and how that affects the management of the basin. And so it's really important that everyone can see exactly how it's being done. And so I think that's an important part of our concerns. Next. Purveyor conjunctive use and water bank accounting is kept on a regional, not a sub-basin level. We are talking about these leaky systems, and we want to make sure that we have a regional accounting, and so we can clearly show how it's affecting the overall resource. The next one here, conduct a transparent process coordinating with the GSAs for the determination of the amount, timing, location, and cumulative impact of diversions, extractions, transfers, and inland water exchanges. We'll have there'll always be a balancing of how you work a water bank within a GSA and within subbasins. And so it's really important that all the partners, all the GSAs who are affected are fully involved in those decisions. You can make one decision that's great for one basin and can harm another basin. And so it's important that this is a widely connected and coordinated type of project. And the Water Forum offers us that kind of good platform where we can talk about these cross-boundary issues. And so I think it will be a really good dynamic process to discuss this. And lastly on this page, that environmental justice needs and includes environmental resource projects are considered in the use of the expected water sale profits. As we've talked about all these benefits that can be realized, there's money involved in both the setting up the structure of the recharge projects, as well as money to be made off of sales. And one of the key concerns of a lot of groups it's hard to funnel money to some of the environmental projects and the EJ projects that could be done, and this money could be a source of that. And so we want to make sure that these needs are considered when we talk about the profits and the sales of the water that's being transferred or sold using conjunctive use. And next is our last concept, is coordinate and foster regional coordination. Next. So we certainly would like to encourage, as you've heard today, that the Water Forum 2.0 and its successor effort embraces a regional conjunctive use, because we do think it's an important part of the whole project and perspective of the region. We'd like to make sure that we expand regional coordination and use of recycled water and Title 215 excess stormwater for recharge in all 3 subbasins, not just the north or the south. Work towards equitable resources across the region for groundwater and surface water planning and management operations. This was sort of highlighted recently when the DWR grant proposal, it's not finalized yet, came out with the North Basin getting all the regional funds and no money going to the South Basin or the Casumas, except for the harvest water. But that there is there's not an even platform of government funding for the kind of modeling work that needs to be done, the kind of planning work that needs to be done for conjunctive use. You know, how it's going to flow across the region is right now up and down. And so we'd like to see how we can figure out a way to make sure that we don't have a disjointed planning process for the various concerns that we all have, given the grant structure that we're working with. And lastly, to make sure that we utilize the latest modeling and forecasting tools. You know, I think we have all been now through the ad hoc report certainly showed us the importance of having good data. We want to make sure that it's constantly updated in a way that we can use it as an important tool, that we don't, as we move through this continual change of climate change, that we're kept up to date and that we're not using set-in-stone governance structures or agreements that necessarily bind us to something that isn't realistic given the climate change that we're facing. So with that, Ted is also here when we get to questions, so we have both our perspectives.
Okay. Great, thank you, Barbara. And now we'll turn to Jim Piper, Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority, to wrap the panel up and talk a little bit about how these ideas and solutions function together. What will the future look like, and what does success look like? So, Jim?
Thank you, Jim. So I get the easy part, which is where do we go from here? But I want to thank the presenters for their presentations. And I also want to highlight, Barbara had her stopwatch going to make sure that she stayed within her time. So
She beat it by 2.5 minutes.
yeah, she did. Great job.
As long as you can think as fast as I can talk.
What I want to say is there's a lot of commonality here. I think that the panel presenters were looking for very, very similar things. And I think that this is an endeavor, conjunctive use, which I think is going to be pretty easy getting to yes on for this organization. But I will acknowledge that the devil is in the details, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into that and a lot of discussion and how things are going to be achieved. I think that there still are some interests that are out there. Groundwater-dependent ecosystems want to be preserved, shallow domestic well owners not impacting other users of water, and we'll have to work through all those details. There will be some things that I think really need to be discharged to the working groups, and we'll have to have a conversation about that. The idea about, which I think is a great idea, Barbara, but that's just my perspective of taking some proceeds of water transfer sales and putting them someplace else, that would need to be discharged to a work group to work through. Other things that are going on, I think that we need to just sort of make sure that the RWA continues to make itself available as we make our progress through the water bank and making sure that those questions that have been put on the table here get answered. And with that, I don't want to take too much time. I want to keep us on track, Jim.
Well,
so thank you very much.
So I think we got almost back within 5 minutes. That's pretty good. So now we'll open it up for questions. Tanya's going to manage the questions and call on people. So
We will start with in the room. We have about 20 minutes for questions, and then we'll go to those online. So we'll start in the room and then go ahead and put your hands up if you're interested, for those of you who are participating on Zoom, and we'll maintain the queue. Any questions for our panelists? I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully you jotted down questions as they emerged for you from Trevor's presentation on to Brett, and then through Barbara's and Jim's. So anyone in the room, do you have questions or thoughts, any insights? Leo?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you. You want me to stand up or?
Yes.
Yes, sure, go ahead. Thank you, Leo.
So I think, Jim, this is a question that goes to you, and I just want to confirm something. Throughout the presentations that were made, there was reference to a lot of environmental values associated with the developing groundwater management plan, conjunctive use, et cetera. But it wasn't specifically mentioned, but somewhere along one of the presentations, I caught a glimpse of what I thought was a question about no environmental objectives within the goals, objectives, principles of the document that's being developed now, the groundwater management plan. Is that correct? Do you know?
I don't know if that's correct. I'd have to pull the document, and I think we'd have to open that up, Leo, to take a look to see if that's the case.
Okay, that'd be good, and I'd go on the website, take a look. I would just suggest, part of the water forum process, that there should be at least an environmental goal associated with the plan, if there isn't one. It should be included there, so that gives us something to work towards as well. It's not forgotten. Thank you.
Brian, welcome.
Barbara, this question is for you. One of the objectives or interests that you had up there related to, my note here says environmental water storage. And I understood you to be saying that if we're going to invest in getting water underground, we should make sure that we're sort of leaving some of that water for environmental purposes, or just leave it, put it in the ground in order to leave it in the ground. That seems like a really good idea to me for lots of reasons. But, as you know, water rights are constrained by their beneficial use. And there have been a number of efforts historically to define groundwater storage as a beneficial use, but it's not. That's never succeeded, and there's been a lot of opposition to that. In other words, you can put it in the ground, but if you don't take it out for subsequent use, either domestic or irrigation or what have you, it's not a beneficial use and doesn't constitute that for purposes of maintaining your water rights. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Is that something, is a change in the law necessary? Would it be good? Are there downsides to that? So that, storing water underground for storage purposes constitutes a valid beneficial use of the right. Any thoughts on that?
I think there's been a lot of ideas floated about environmental water and surface water dams, reservoirs, in order to be used for downstream purposes when it is necessary to augment flows for water sales to benefit environmental projects. So it doesn't necessarily have to be left in the ground forever and ever, but it could be used for the same beneficial uses that are acknowledged in the water rights, but in times of need or in times of where it could benefit in another way. And so I think we can look more expansively at the use of that water rather than just in and out for water supply projects. But I think it could be used in terms of sale or in terms of offsetting additional flows in the river at times where it's needed.
I'd like to add, I think another aspect of this is that there are losses associated with this program. I mean, you put the water in, it doesn't just stay right in that spot, it moves, so you can't necessarily recover it all. And then secondly, your point is brings a question to my mind, because I thought that under the current determination that groundwater-dependent ecosystems are a beneficial use. So if you were leaving something in to enhance those systems, it seems to me that would be acceptable. But I'm not an expert in water rights. I really defer that to someone who is.
I'd love to provide an answer to that question and give you my perspective. So I just want to let you know that I'm not an attorney. I know, but I can't help myself. I want to give an unambiguous yes to your answer. So I'm hoping that we can get some support from the environmental caucus.
Would that be at like a 10% leave behind level, or is there any, tentative plan about what percent of water would be left?
We haven't defined that just yet. That is something that's being discussed. I would say within the program committee for the water bank, that is a topic of discussion. The program committee has not settled on that yet, or even the question, would there be, a leave behind? But it has been said and brought up by the RWA for a number of years now that a leave behind is something that we should be considering. Again, no resolution on that. When Trevor talks about this, and I should have given Trevor the opportunity to answer this question, but let me do my best to channel Trevor. We want to make sure that that is a technically driven and data-driven idea, backed up by some analysis, which is what is appropriate for a leave behind.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to go online for a moment because Trevor did message in chat in response to Leo's original question. And Trevor, you may also have a response to what Jim just shared. So could I go to you, Trevor, for a moment?
Yeah, in regards to Jim's statement, he's absolutely right. The program committee definitely wanted to make sure a leave behind, if developed, is scientifically at least based or considered. So through the modeling work, we're going to look at that and figure out with the program committee what's most appropriate. So it's in the works, trying to figure out what that would look like. And then in regards to, I believe the gentleman's first question, Leo's question, and I was the one that blew our time today and spoke too long and didn't do them justice on kind of articulating some of the goals, objectives, principles, and constraints. And so I apologize for that. So I kind of blew by that, but you're absolutely right. If you had a kind of a good eye, there is both a objective and our goal statement considers and is supportive of a healthy ecosystem function on the Lower American River. So, the program committee is committed to that goal with the water bank.
Thank you, Trevor. Yes, I'm going to come back into the room. I want to give some folks online a chance because they've been waiting patiently.
This is directly related to this point.
Okay, you want to, it's on this thread.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll scan this thread. Go ahead.
Okay, so.
And one moment, I'll get to you, Paul and Holger. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
So, the graphs that I saw that Trevor had in his presentation appeared to be a one-for-one exchange between surface water and groundwater in terms of the concept of in-lieu recharge. So there wasn't, at least historically, if I understood what we were being shown, any acknowledgement that not all that water is actually available in the groundwater system.
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, well, basically, ASR, artificial recharge, we know that not all the water is available to be pulled back out from the wells. Some gets trapped in the groundwater. But also, if you use surface water through a municipal system, all sorts of things happen to that water. Some of it is wasted, they're just losses. And so it's not actually 100% one for one, and yet the graphs look like that. So I'm just curious if any attempt has been made to account for the difference between the actual water that ends up in groundwater versus the actual uses of surface water.
So accounting for the losses. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, maybe I could speak to that. So we again, modeling, we're looking at not only a leave behind, but a loss factor. So a loss factor might be more related to what you're describing. Will we see losses from our groundwater storage? Will it go beneath the basin boundaries? Because as Barbara mentioned, these boundaries are not necessarily perfect hydrologic boundaries and keep all of the water in our respective basins. We do have some things working in our advantage, though. Again, I showed that cone of those cones of depression, our contour maps. Groundwater actually is, for the most part, flowing kind of towards the center, downhill. Groundwater flows downhill too, towards the center of our basin. So we're pretty optimistic that we'll be able to store a large quantity and retain that within our basin. But the modeling analysis will kind of help us understand where we may see some losses. And then the accounting system, again, helps us understand what we have banked versus what we may see in terms of losses and potentially what's recoverable. So all good questions. And we'll be running that analysis in the next few months.
Appreciate that, Trevor. Thank you. I'm going to stick with those online because they've been waiting for some time, and then I saw your hand, Inga. So I'll go to Holger, then, Paul Helliker, then Holger, and then I'll come to Inga in the room. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, and thanks especially to the presenters. They were all good presentations. Just a couple comments. On one of the last comments, conjunctive use is actually already included in the waterform agreement in multiple locations. And as Trevor noted, we've succeeded in operating the water bank over the past 23 years and have succeeded in banking 400,000 acre feet in the central unit and more in other parts where there aren't specific accounting frameworks. And those are via the facilities that Brett described. So I appreciate Brett's presentation of all that good information. And then on Trevor's comment and his slide about the benefits, I think we can say that the operations we've been doing have included the full range of the benefits, including recovery for local and out of region use and the other benefits listed. The only one we haven't had is to be able to bank CVP water outside of service areas. And so that's the primary focus of the water bank. And to assure our environmental caucus friends, we've certainly been complying with SGMA, and we fully expect to continue to do so. And then just one last comment back on Jim Ray's presentation. I want to make sure everybody does review the whole study that that information was extracted from, and particularly the information on page 12 of the study, which talks about the uncertainties and the limitations in the modeling. The model assumes that no actions are taken to reduce deliveries or secure regulatory relief. And those actions actually do happen in critically dry years. So the model results are a little skewed and not completely accurate. So take those with a grain of salt. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Go ahead, Holger, and then we'll go to Inga and then Barbara Leary.
Thanks to everyone for the presentations. I was wondering how the groundwater banking and the availability of that groundwater is accounted for in the current GSPs, or if it even is.
Trevor, I'm gonna give you this one, and you can speak to the water bank as a project.
Yeah. So good question. The groundwater sustainability plan that was developed, included forecasts with climate change and projected land use, and looked at, we defined sustainable water levels, looking again at those beneficial uses and users of groundwater. I'm trying to get back to the modeling analysis to answer your question as directly as I can, but I'm forgetting what was done in there exactly related to the water bank. But the water bank really, as Paul mentioned, through conjunctive use, we've seen water levels, and I've hit on this, increase in the groundwater basin. So, in Jim Pfeiffer has brought this up historically that, we've actually, in my mind, have already been doing Sigma related management, pre-Sigma. We've put in place the region conjunctive use projects that have actually done really what is required in the spirit of Sigma to maintain or increase water levels. So I feel like I'm not answering your question directly. Maybe I don't completely understand it, to be honest, Holger, but the bank will help us maintain sustainability and keep seeing, through the banking activities, I think we'll keep seeing stable or increasing groundwater levels over time because we have that pattern of already doing so with community use.
I appreciate that position, Trevor. The question really gets at if the GSP accounts for a healthy groundwater basin or even increases in the groundwater elevations, does that account for the availability or reduce the availability of banked groundwater, if you will? I mean, the banked groundwater obviously is beneficial to the groundwater elevations. I don't think there's any questions about that. But is that then truly available, or is that accounted for in, hey, we got to keep this water in the ground to keep the sustainable levels that the GSPs identify? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, kind of more from an ongoing operation standpoint. How can we make sure that the bank, and how was it considered, and kind of ongoing Sigma implementation? Yeah, and that's going to get to kind of a little bit of adaptive management. I mean, so again, we cannot exceed our minimum thresholds without starting to create some challenges and from a Sigma standpoint. So we're mindful of that. So we're working to set up the bank, because the devil's is in the details, as Barbara mentioned. We need to know where our sensitive beneficial uses and users are. Some of the most sensitive, because they require the highest groundwater levels, are groundwater dependent ecosystems and domestic users. And so we're really making sure that we have a good handle on where the water levels need to be sufficiently managed for those users, amongst other users. And so it is going to be, through the accounting process, through our monitoring grid. Modeling helps us forecast what's possible. We are and will have a detailed groundwater monitoring grid. So we'll have many monitoring wells. We already have that for groundwater substitution transfers, but it will be enhanced for the water bank so that we can keep kind of a real-time accounting. I'm using accounting maybe in a different way of the actual conditions in the basin to make sure that we're managing to be true to our goals and principle statements that we have put in place. But that's going to be a little bit of an adaptive management process as we work through implementation.
Thank you, Trevor. I see that we are running short on time. I'll just mention that we have question and comment cards here. If we're not able to get to your question, please do write them down, and we'll document them and bring them into working group discussions or to bring them into whatever venue is appropriate. But let's try to take a few more. I did see we have 4 people currently in the queue and a 5th, but I don't think we're going to get to all the folks here in the last few minutes, but we'll do our best. Inga, and then Barbara, and then I've got Brian, Ron, and Rob in the queue.
Just want to say, Clyde, your vision has been realized, and this education piece has been so valuable. So
thank you for that.
Yeah.
A lot of work has gone into this.
It's obvious, yeah. Trevor, I have a question for you. In addition to the cones of depression providing excess storage, is there any thinking, any planning, and would it be valuable, the area the south of Folsom that is considered a paleo valley, whereas I understand it that it would be ideal for dry wells to go in utility area, so it wouldn't necessarily limit development, but it would be a natural recharge area where the gravel and, you know, like a perfect recharge area. And I'm not sure if that's still within the vicinity where it's useful in terms of our region. And if it is, what is it thinking about that? Because that seems like an ideal area in some respects to me.
Yeah, no, good point. And yeah, I mean, if we can do surface spreading type of recharge, it can be much more cost effective and a really good approach to increasing the amount of artificial recharge in the basin. And that area has been looked at, and I'm not aware of all the studies, I must confess, by Sac County as well as others, but is still being looked at for surface spreading type of facilities. You know, there's multiple things that need to be kind of considered when you're doing recharge from a technical standpoint. You know, it's location, like owning a home. You need to have areas where the soils are conductive and you can, you know, not a lot of clay, and can actually get the water into the ground. So that's important. Actually, DWR has just recently done some really cool advanced aerial imagery to look at this kind of throughout the Central Valley. So you want to find those locations, but you also then need to be able to divert surface water, right, to get to those locations. And so sometimes you can identify good locations, but you just don't have the surface water conveyance to reach those locations. So that's something that needs to be looked at as well. So that would, you know, be a contribution that is in the South American basin, if I understood the area you mentioned specifically. And, you know, SAFCA is also looking at opportunities like that. There are some other agencies that are advancing the planning related to, or at least feasibility of doing that type of recharge. And there may be others on the call that could speak to that with more knowledge than myself.
I want to follow in on behind Trevor, and I want to say I agree with everything he said. But I also want to say that we haven't done any site-specific investigations or anything like that with respect to the Paleo Valley that has been discovered south of the American River. I'll also say that, you know, that's under the SCGA area, the South American GSP. So I want to just be very, very careful and very clear that that is not within the sort of sphere of where Trevor and I work at, the North American subbasin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We are short on time. I'm wondering if it would be okay to go at least 5 minutes. Do you feel like we can push a little bit? All right, Barbara Leary, let me go to you.
So thank you. And I just needed some clarification here. So I'm assuming that the banking capacity doesn't depend on static use, but there's been, we have talked in the past about the reduced demand for water in suburban areas or urban areas versus farmland. And so I'm not clear that the numbers that we were looking at today reflect future uses. And I have a second kind of piece to that is during drought years, isn't there, and I don't know what the significance of the subsidence is, you know, in those water basins, because we know that exists throughout the Central Valley. So are these numbers, I guess, that probably Trevor presented, reflected in the future capacity?
Yeah, let me jump in, and I'm going to ask Trevor also to jump in on this, but just a couple things. You had mentioned subsidence, and that is correct. That's a concern throughout the Central Valley. Not a concern here. We tend to be geologically blessed in this area. There have been significant groundwater declines and consumption over the years. with very, very little land surface subsidence. It also makes this area sort of a geological gift for us because we can also utilize that geology and fill the groundwater basin up. That doesn't happen everywhere in California. You have different geology and different geographical circumstances where that's a problem. The second thing is yes, it depends on how much groundwater you're pumping out of the ground in terms of how you put all that together. What we've identified strictly is there's roughly 60,000 acre-feet of groundwater banking and extraction capacity with the infrastructure in the urban area today, not the agricultural area, the urban area. And there is the potential for an additional 30,000 acre-feet if we build the infrastructure for that. Regardless of the baseline in terms of how much water is being extracted or consumed. I want to emphasize the urban area, agricultural areas are something that can be added onto the water bank. Trevor touched on that a little bit in his presentation today. Harvest water is a possibility there, but beyond those areas, the urban area and harvest water, we haven't really set up a mechanism to account for that. Hopefully that's helpful, and if it's not, let's chat after the presentation today.
Okay, I have another question, but I won't add it on now.
Thank you, Jim, and Trevor, I don't think we'll go to you because of time, and Barbara, let me just check in with Brian, Ron, and Rob, and see if we have time to get back to your question. If not, I would encourage you to write it down on the question card, and we'll bring it up at another venue. So if we could all just be as succinct as possible to honor our time. You're okay for right now, Brian. Thank you. And do write it down if it would benefit from the discussion. Ron, did you have something?
Okay, I'll make this quick. I won't expect an answer. I'll just raise the question. Which is, I think, a follow-up to the first question, which is, are there needed changes to water rights, either globally or specifically, to be able to store water in the ground? And I think that Barbara gave an answer, but I think a fuller discussion would be helpful, given how much fretting there has been about this at Aqua and in some of these other forums, where water rights have felt to be a constraint to storing water in the ground.
Thank you for raising that question about water rights, and we'll take it up in another venue. It's good to capture it here. And Rob Burness, did you have a question?
I have a question, and I don't expect an answer, but I think I'll pose it now, just to get people reacting. If I understand correctly, there were some 500,000 acre-feet of water that have been stored in the conjunctive use plan to date since 2012. So, whatever that number, I'm wondering whether it is anticipated that that water that's been previously banked will be carry over into the new regional water bank, and if so, what are the implications of its withdrawal for exchanges and sale? And should the Regional Water Authority have any specific policies that address that matter?
Can we capture, okay, just a brief one?
I just wanted to just answer that briefly, just to make sure that we're clear, we're all clear on this. 500,000 acre-feet, I haven't heard that number. That seems a little high to me.
There's 400-something thousand on the graph.
In terms of previously banked water, no decision has been made on that. We still have to work through those details. And there is a desire by some of the program participants to utilize some of the banked water that has been banked in the past, but there has not been a decision made on that, and how much of that is to be credited into the future. And should there be a policy on that, I can propose policies to my board. I'm not the policy maker. That's something that's probably going to need more discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that. So we've got a number from Paul Helliker, 394,000 acre feet that has been made in the SGA.
I want to talk about that too.
Okay,
There is a lot of nuance to that number that is not captured in Paul's chat, and I just want people to understand that. There's a lot that is embedded in that with the water accounting framework, which the SGA had adopted about 13 years ago. Simply put, on a spreadsheet, you'll see 394,000 acre feet, but there is way more nuance to that than just a number that you can take out of the ground.
okay, well, thank you for saying that and caveating it. We should hold those numbers lightly without that context.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing from your response there. If there are other questions, we really encourage you to write them down in the question card, include them in the chat quickly here for those of you still online, and thank you for staying long. I think if we can hold on disclosures unless there's something very time sensitive, we can do that today, but I'll just send it over to you, and maybe you'll want to come over here, Jessica, so everyone can see your face online.
We don't have to look behind the panel.
To close the day.
First, a big round of applause for our panel. I'm consistently impressed with the amount of expertise in this room, and really just the level of questions and discussion is absolutely outstanding. Again, this is what we do best. So thank you all for coming today. One quick note, in the agenda package that I sent out by email, there's the final Water Forum 2.0 cost share agreement. And I just want to say that all of this work that we are doing now is so critical and so important. And I want to say that that document, go ahead and read it, but that document represents a tremendous commitment by the water purveyors, the Water Caucus members. We've also been joined by East Bay Mud, SAFTA, Mud is still in there, EID has joined as well, and I just really, worth another round of applause. It's just a really strong commitment from the region to be working through this process over the next 2 years. So, all right. I think that's everything for today. Please, if you have other questions, take a comment card, jot a note down. There's extra bagels. Please take a bagel home. And we'll see you all in July.
The paper keeper on the SGA, she's a great employee. I